Good morning, everyone. On this date, August 16, in 1896, some prospectors were digging around near the Klondike River, which is in western Canada, in the Yukon Territory, not far from the Alaska border. And they found some gold. And this led to the Klondike Gold Rush. In 1867, under the guidance of William Seward, our Secretary of State, we bought Alaska from Russia. So this map of Alaska shows the Yukon River, and the Klondike River rises in the Yukon Territory and flows into the Yukon River. And this is what those rivers look like. They're flat and shallow, so lots of places for people to pan for gold. And in that whole Yukon River, Klondike River area, people were looking for gold for a long time. And George Carmack was the fellow who found gold on this date, August 16, in 1896. And people had been looking for gold there for a long, long time. And about a year later, it made it into the newspapers. And this is when the Klondike Gold Rush really began. It was so remote up there that the word didn't get out right away. Now, the Canadian government made a rule that you had to have a year's worth of supplies with you if you were going to search for gold up in Canada. So lots of people had to assemble that, and then you had some choices on how you would get there. You could go by sea and then go up the Yukon, or you could cut across Canada, or you could go up the panhandle of Alaska. And this is a closer view of that region, and you note that inland passes, especially by Juneau and so on, get you to Skagway, and then from there people would go up into Canada. So there were lots of routes, and many people went through Seattle, and here's a photograph of people boarding ships in Seattle. So the Klondike Gold Rush was a real boost for Seattle as a maritime city. And then once you got there, you had to get your permit. And here's a photo of men getting a mining permit from the Canadian government. So that was kind of a hassle. And then you made base camp in the mountains. So here's a picture of the base camp, and then you could see in the distance up the various valleys, the lines of men going up to look for gold. And here's another picture of that. And this is in the part of Alaska that borders Canada, but this view happened in many parts of the Klondike River region. Now, you might get around by sleds. Many of the miners put their supplies on sleds. Here's a sled you see with a person on it, so maybe that person was sick or something happened. Another way you could get around on the water was with sails, and you'll note these boats have runners on them, so you could sail along the frozen rivers. That would be one way to go. Another way to go would be by a dog sled, and here you can see these dogs waiting patiently to get going as they went up into the wilderness. Dog sleds are still used up in Alaska. And you might use horses pulling wagons on runners. And this was really hard on horses, and there's a trail that was known as Dead Horse Trail, and here you can see dead horses and skeletons of horses. Partly the climate and partly the hard work just wiped these horses out. And once you got to the river, you probably didn't make much money. And this is kind of like the California Gold Rush too. Very few people actually struck it rich. You might get some gold nuggets in your pan, but that was about it. And most of the people who went up end up going back to the lower 48 states. Now today, supposedly you can see ruins of that area. Here's an abandoned railroad trestle in that region where the Yukon abuts Alaska. And this is Skagway itself, which is in that inland passage. People would go up to Skagway and then go inland. There's a historical site here and a museum, and I guess it's worth a visit. And they are still finding relics of the miners who went up there, and most of them, not too successful, ended up quitting and going back to the lower 48.